I was an
to
English
throw
major.
your hands up and admit you were wrong.
No, I know that you guys are doing the RNC's work for them. I know you're trying
Facts
to help
matter,
folks who are
Wajahat.
struggling right
Facts
now.
matter, you said.
No, I
Facts
facts.
matter.
You said you all are saying that she's the border czar, and I have ears and I heard that, and she is not the border czar. She literally was given that responsibility. She's not the border czar. And if you want to play on immigration, I will gladly play on immigration. Please explain to me why don't
Matter, you said.
called up Republicans and told them to tank what would have been the strictest bipartisan immigration bill in which he said would help President Biden, and Republicans bent the knee. So instead of talking security,
I
they
don't mind
came
you
to
playing
Trump.
whataboutery, but actually, being Joe Biden's presidency.
I'm not. Let's just have facts.
I'm happy
When it
give
comes to
answers.
facts, you're on slightly slippery ground today, I have to say. I want to change subject now, and I want to move to Benjamin Netanyahu's appearance yesterday in Congress. I will start with you here, because I can imagine you're probably not one of the people joining in the wild celebrations of people in Congress at Netanyahu's speech.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most unpopular leader in Israel. 72% of Israelis don't like him. The family members of the hostages, Israeli hostages, don't like him and protest to him. He is one of the most hated leaders in all the world, and he came to the United States of America, gaslit America, spent lies about America, tried to get American money for his failed war, tried to get America again to engage in another war on Israel's behalf, send U.S. troops and U.S. money to fight this war in Iran. And I think most people were horrified and disgusted by it. He lied about his track record, took zero responsibility for his failures in this war, his failure to bring back the hostages, lied, things that we've talked about on your show, Pierce, for the past 10 months, the civilian casualties, the death of 40,000 people. He tried to minimize all of that. And look, the Republicans, like lapdogs, ate it up. They applauded him. I thought it was very shameful, especially as he mocked and ridiculed even U.S. citizens who are protesting. You can disagree with the protest, but he called them Hamas. Does that include the Jewish protesters? Does that include the family members of the hostages who flew here from Israel to protest him? And also, I want to remind people that Israel itself, Israel's top security intelligence officials, sent a letter to the United States asking U.S. Congress not to host Netanyahu because they said, not me, they said Netanyahu is an existential threat to Israel. Republicans lapped it up, gave him hooting and hollering, standing ovation. Shameful sight to see. Shameful sight to see.
Okay, Michael Knowles. I mean, I've got to admit, I found it a little unpalatable, the scale of the kind of celebratory mood towards Netanyahu, given what has happened in this war since last October. I've always said Israel had an absolute fundamental right and duty to defend itself after the horrific terror attack of October the 7th. But the overwhelming scale has struck me as increasingly disproportionate, and there's no apparent plan for what happens to the people of Gaza at the end of all this. Most of Gaza has now been destroyed, and the ongoing deaths of innocent people continue unabated, while everyone is distracted by what's happening over here in America. I mean, there's a way to support someone who runs one of the great allies of America without looking like it was a celebration of the way that Israel perpetrated the war, isn't that?
Certainly. I think part of the reason that especially Republicans in Congress were welcoming to Prime Minister Netanyahu is because so many leftists in America have reacted so violently even against the notion of Israeli self-defense and in favor of the pro-Palestine movement. So Wajahat mentions gaslighting. The only gaslighting I saw yesterday was the gaslighting on the American flags at Union Station when the pro-Palestine protesters lit it on fire. I think that kind of imagery is why so many Americans are willing to take Israel's side in this. And so I totally agree with you, Peters. I mean, Israel is its own country, and we have interests that overlap in some ways, and we have interests that diverge in some ways. And I don't think the American people want to go to war in Iran or pursue regime change in Iran or anything like that. But when Prime Minister Netanyahu says that there are Americans acting like useful idiots for Iran, and these are Americans who are in league with people who are burning the American flag, that raises a lot of eyebrows, and it's going to lead people to support the other side.
Yeah, Elizabeth, what was your overview of yesterday? Because everyone has, again, a fundamental right to peacefully protest, but that should not extend to some brazenly supporting Hamas, as some of those protesters were doing. And again, I ask you the same question. Did you feel entirely comfortable with the scale of the ovation that Netanyahu was getting yesterday?
It's interesting. I haven't thought about your second question. No one's asked me that. And when I watched, I didn't think about that. However, when you say it, if I'm being completely honest, I was uncomfortable with what I saw in Congress when they were waving Ukrainian flags and celebrating aid to Ukraine. So, yeah, I think I'm a little uncomfortable when I see anyone showing some kind of loyalty or excitement for a country when we have to focus on what's going on here. And when like was mentioned, what happened in Israel, what's been going on for 9 months now, has caused as much pain as it has. That being said, Benjamin Netanyahu is the democratically elected leader of one of our strongest and closest allies. And I think worse than the celebration, as you called it, in Congress yesterday was the fact that many elected officials were not there, the fact that Kamala Harris was not there, and the fact that Bibi Netanyahu had to stand there and applaud those that stand for the American flag while our own people outside were burning the American flag and screaming that Hamas is coming. So there's many things that we can say about yesterday. There's a lot going on, obviously, but I find it incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly sad, and appalling, if I'm being honest, to see the reaction to a leader of our ally in this country after everything that's going on and knowing full well that Americans are being held hostage right now as well. And a good relationship with Israel and with Bibi Netanyahu could ensure that those hostages come home. So I think it was inappropriate at best, but disgraceful, honestly, at worst, that we're talking about everything that went on yesterday.
Donald Trump is obviously, he saw Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a big supporter of Israel. He did a lot of work in that region when he was president. As with all these things, Donald Trump makes it sound easy to fix the problem. But it's not easy, is it? I mean, it's going to be an incredibly difficult and complex and probably very long-running issue to try and resolve what has happened in Israel and Gaza since the events of October the 7th.
I would only assume that it would be. Look, it can't be easy to fix anything that's gone on in our world or anything that's happened in the last 4 years of this Biden administration. However, I think Donald Trump's record speaks for itself. He has spoken for wanting peace for many years, peace through strength, as he calls it. And despite all the attacks on him, the embassy would cause mass chaos and everything else that he did, being from him, etc. He did have peace during those 4 years, and since Joe Biden has come in, we've seen the opposite. I'm not sitting here and saying anyone can fix either conflict in Ukraine or in Gaza in 24 hours, but I will say that for the last 4 years that we have seen, I can only imagine the American people want a change and to give someone else a chance, because the war in Ukraine is ongoing with no end in sight. Obviously, what's going on in Gaza has no end in sight, with Americans being held and dozens of Americans being murdered on October 7th, and people have every right to want someone to come in and put a stop to all of it.
Okay, look, I want to just bring in another guest and then get the panel's reaction after I finish this interview. I'm joined by the Republican South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Now, Nancy Mace, thank you very much indeed for joining me. You made a lot of headlines because during the hearing of the then Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatham, before she sensationally resigned, you said this.
Most of my questions are going to demand a yes or no answer. Do you understand? Okay, my first question. Both sides of the aisle today have asked for your resignation. Would you like to use my 5 minutes to draft your resignation letter? Yes or no? Was this a colossal failure? It was a failure. Yes or no? Was it a colossal failure is the question. Yes or no? This is a yes or no series of questions. Was this a colossal failure? Yes or no? Yes. Have you provided all audio and video recordings in your possession to this committee as we asked on July 15th? Yes or no? I would have to speak back to that. That is a no. You're full of shit today. You're just being completely dishonest. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
I want to.
Come on.
We have to maintain decorum in this committee.
You are being dishonest or lying. You're being dishonest here with this committee. These are important questions that the American people want answers to, and you're just dodging and talking around it in generalities. And we had this opportunity to be here, and you won't even answer the questions. We've asked you repeatedly to answer our questions. This isn't hard.
Well, I have to say, Nancy Mace, I did think you spoke for most of us when you used that expletive. Just on the decorum point, do you wish with hindsight you hadn't used that language, or do you think it pretty well hit the nail on the head?
I could have said much worse, Pierce, on Monday. My frustrations were deep, and I believe I was simply saying aloud what every person watching that hearing across the country and the world was feeling that day. Because here's a woman who's the director of the Secret Service and would not, either could not, would not, was unable or unwilling to answer even the simplest of questions on Monday. She couldn't even tell us the number of Secret Service agents on the ground protecting Donald Trump at the rally that day. And you saw hand wringing by Republicans and Democrats alike. Both sides by the end of the day had most of us had called for her resignation. She sat there brazen, defiant, and basically gave a middle finger to middle America on Monday. And she deserved everything that I gave her.
It was a pretty shocking performance after a pretty shocking failure by the agency on the day that Donald Trump was shot. When you saw what she was doing in front of you guys, saw how she was obfuscating, saw how she wasn't answering really any questions, did it show you that there is something fundamental wrong with the Secret Service at the moment in terms of its structure and leadership?
Absolutely. But I think this is fundamental. This is a fundamental problem across many of our federal agencies. And the thing that I walked away with, and I had, 24 hours to think about it after I filed my articles of impeachment. By the way, I was going to force a vote on ousting her and firing her within 48 hours. But the thing that really struck me a few hours after the hearing was perhaps they didn't share any information with her because of anticipation of her testifying before Congress. And if that's what happened, if that was the case, if that's why she couldn't answer our questions, the problem is even bigger than I imagined. The obfuscating this is clearly dishonest actions. They're trying to hide information from us, and she's going to be part of the cover-up. And we've got to get to the bottom of it. And I'm glad to see Speaker Mike Johnson create a task force specific to this investigation because we all deserve answers, and we ought to know that they're going to do everything they can to ensure no one tries to shoot Donald Trump ever again.
Right. I mean, I've got to say, I've seen some baffling things in my time as a journalist over 4 decades. I cannot remember anything quite as inexplicable as what went down on that day that Donald Trump was shot. And we now discover from the FBI boss's testimony yesterday that this kid who's 20 years old, I mean, we know so little about him, which in itself is so weird, that he was flying a drone over the stage area where Donald Trump was due to speak 2 hours before. And nobody from the Secret Service appeared to notice or do anything to try and work out who was flying this drone. Then he just ambles up onto this roof, which is clearly, to even the most amateur security observer, would be the most obvious place for an assassin to put themselves if they wanted to get a clear shot at President Trump. He's able to take his gun up there. We have members of the public warning officials that they can see this kid on this roof. There are Secret Service snipers with trained sights on him who've seen him, but he still gets off at least 8 bullets. None of this makes any sense to me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist until I believe there's a theory that can be proven. But none of this makes any sense. Right. How did this happen?
Well, I think it's one of two things, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist either. It's either incompetency or it's conspiracy. And I made the point in the hearing on Monday that between the time that they took their first photo and installed him on deck at the rally, 57 minutes went by between the time they took the first photo, the first agent took the first photo, and the first shots were fired. Now, the 20-year-old Crooks was killed within seconds. So clearly, it seems like logic would tell you they had him in their sights also. So it is baffling, which is why it's so important that we get transparency. And unfortunately, we're not getting it from federal agents. We are getting more information from local law enforcement on the ground, who also informed us that the Secret Service missed an important security briefing that morning, the morning of the rally. We also know that building wasn't swept, even though it was used as a staging location for law enforcement. So this law enforcement were buzzing around, people were buzzing around, individuals saw him, this was able to happen, and no one did anything about it. And so more than one person should probably resign. We need to force testimony by Secretary Mayorkas, and we need to hear from whistleblowers who have information that can piece the puzzle together that the federal government refuses to do today.
Are you concerned, as some people have been, about the impact of a DEI policy of the Secret Service. When you looked at the way that and I don't want to single out the female agents. I'm sure they're all highly trained and as elite as the men in the Secret Service. But there was something really uncomfortable about watching the interaction and behavior of those female agents at the front of the car, in particular the one who couldn't even apparently holster her gun properly several times. That imagery does not send to the world a confidence that the presidents of the United States, previous or current or future, are being protected by the world's most elite agents.
Right, and even former Director Cheadle said on Monday she didn't have any quotas, but we know because we have the receipts, it was over 33% that she required to be female agents. Now, the thing that really worse than the video, Pierce, was the harrowing image of Donald Trump with his fist in the air is an image that will go down iconically in history. But the one thing that really disturbed me from that image was the female agent trying her best to cover up Donald Trump, but she left his entire head, his face, his heart, all exposed. So if there was another shooter, a second shooter, she was unable physically to lift him up off the ground because she was too small, but also she left all of his major organs exposed. So if he were to get shot in that position, he would have been killed. And that, to me, I'm sure there are many women who are trained in Secret Service or in law enforcement who are taller than 5 feet and who could cover him up and help him keep him protected in that particular gesture. That was really disturbing for me to watch.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've been saying this from the start because although it was an iconic image of defiance by Donald Trump, he should never have been allowed to do it. When he was taken down by the Secret Service, their next move collectively should have been to gut him off that stage and into a car and out of there as fast as humanly possible without exposing him to the potential of a second shooter. But instead, they allowed him to stand back up. They put a relatively small female agent in front of him, which doesn't protect him from his upper torso up to his top of his head. And none of that again makes sense to me. So what are you guys all doing? It's like Keystone Cop stuff.
No, seriously. And we, when America is strong, the world is strong. That was definitely a show of weakness on the world stage. And it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we have strong leaders who are going to call it like they see it, like I did on Monday, and ensure that this culture of failure in the Biden administration does not continue, which is why it's so important that we elect Donald Trump, but that we elect strong leaders, because very few people in Congress in either chamber are willing to call it out, are willing to ask the tough questions, and are willing to do more than write a strongly worded letter. If we want to fire someone, an officer that we can impeach, then we ought to force a vote on it, for example, which is what I did Monday night. I'm tired of seeing hearings and nothing coming from them. So if you're responsible for this horrific tragedy that happened, if Biden isn't going to fire you, we ought to force your resignation. That's what we did on Tuesday morning. But it's time more for action. Let's talking more action when these kinds of horrific things are happening. People have to be held accountable. And that's got to be on both sides of the aisle going forward.
2 quick questions away from this before I let you go. One about President Biden's final address to the American people. We've seen this as his final address from the Oval Office. What was your response watching it last night?
Well, confused. He was clearly confused, and he would not admit to why he was stepping down from his campaign. It didn't give any confidence in him being able to lead our country over the next 6 months. That was very telling that they're continuing the cover-up. No one is willing to admit why he's stepping down from their campaign. And if you don't have the strength or mental acuity to run a race for president, you certainly don't have the strength or mental acuity to run the United States of America. I believe that the 25th Amendment should be invoked here. But also there's no one more weak than Joe Biden than Kamala Harris. So November just can't come here fast enough today, because I want to show American strength. And I will tell you the words of Bibi Netanyahu last night that Kamala and Joe Biden both skipped made me feel more proud to be an American than any other foreign dignitary who's been in there to date. It was deeply inspiring. That is the kind of strength America needs to have going forward to fight terrorism, to fight against the woke left, to fight against all these policies that are bringing our country down.
Finally, as a woman, a Republican woman, do you think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance both have to be more careful about the language they're using now towards a female nominee on the other side. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples. One, Donald Trump yesterday called Kamala Harris dumb as a rock, a lunatic, and garbage. And J.D. Vance, from an earlier clip from an interview with Tucker Carlson several years ago, called her a childless cat lady, which is now being used, obviously, by Kamala Harris's side as a stick to beat the Republicans with as a bunch of misogynists. Does the game have to change now in terms of rhetoric because there is a woman now likely to be the nominee?
I just watched Kamala Harris give a speech just moments ago where she called every single Republican an extremist and was spouting off lies and conspiracy theories about our party. I'm someone who likes to call it like I see it. I do believe that it is very important that we as Republicans talk about women's issues and that we have women on the stage. We have women speaking at Trump rallies. And in fact, it was Donald Trump who invited me onto the stage at the convention to talk about foreign policy, to talk about women's issues, and to tell my story as a single mom and as a suburban mom. And look, when Trump was president, he had so many women in his cabinet. He supports women. He supports IVF. He supports contraception and birth control. He supports women who are victims of rape and victims of incest. And those are the kinds of things that I want to see us talk about. And I've had really good conversations with Donald Trump about women's issues. I know that he cares. He's a father of girls. And he's a grandfather, and he's done a very good job so far talking about them, but we've got more to do. We've got between now and November to talk about the border, to talk about inflation, and to talk about how we support life and also how we support women in every single city across America.
Okay. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Senator.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go back to the panel for a quick reaction to that. Wajahat, your response to what happened to Donald Trump, putting aside whether you like him or not, you know, where you sit with him personally, it does seem to have been a quite spectacular failure by the Secret Service to protect someone who's been president of the United States.
I think we could all agree that we've never seen anything like that before. All of it. We need more information, specifically how come they didn't know about the shooter? How come after he was tagged about 90 seconds before the shooting by the crowd, how come he wasn't stopped? How come, you know, you and I have seen these episodes where Secret Service protect individuals. You know, how come they didn't just whisk him away? He got back up during an active shooting for that photo. That itself, honestly, when I was watching them, like, why? What are they doing? And then also, as of yesterday, I think the American people deserve to know more information about what happened. Christopher Wray of the FBI said, we don't know if a bullet hit him or if it was a shard. Is it a bullet? Is it a shard? What's the hospital records? I think Donald Trump should release the hospital records from that night. We don't trust Ronnie Jackson or Ronnie Johnson, whatever he called him, his doctor who's no longer a doctor. He said, oh, no, I treated him. Give us a hospital record. What's the treatment? What's the diagnosis? What's the injury? How is he healing? Give us more information and do more of an investigation as to how the Secret Service, especially that team at that time, bungled it up from before to the shooting to after the shooting. We deserve more information.
All right, Elizabeth, I mean, is it unreasonable for that information to be made public? I mean, it was interesting that the FBI director, Wray, yesterday seemed to cast some doubt over whether Donald Trump's ear injury had been sustained by a bullet or by something else. Would the best way to clear that up be to release the medical record?
I can't speak for Donald Trump, but I agree. I think in the interest of transparency, the American people deserve that when it comes to what happened to him, which we all saw, unfortunately, on our screens, which was terrifying, but also in regards to what happened with the Secret Service failure. The American people deserve better than that. My father-in-law was actually sitting behind Donald Trump, so I had one of the most terrifying 45 seconds of my life, not knowing if either one of them was alive. We know that an American's life was actually lost. I think that the Secret Service director resigning is the bare minimum, but it is what is owed, of course, to this family and to all of us. But I think a deeper investigation must be had. I think the American people deserve more. They deserve answers. Donald Trump deserves answers. The family who lost a father and a husband deserves answers. And I think we all need to know what happened. We need to ensure this never happens again. And we need to know what caused this failure to begin with. I think it's something that I would hope we all agreed on.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Knowles, there was a strange survey came out from YouGov, a poll, saying that 42% of Democrats blame Donald Trump and the Republicans for the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which just seemed to me to be a completely absurd finding.
Of course they do, because Joe Biden and all of the Democrat leadership have established that premise. Joe Biden's entire campaign was predicated on Donald Trump posing an existential threat to democracy and Donald Trump following in the footsteps of Adolf Hitler, which he said in many ways, many times. And so if those two things are true, they're not true, obviously, like so many things that Biden says, but if those things were true, then that would justify the assassination of Donald Trump, unless you think that we ought to play soft with Hitler or with existential threats to our country. So I'm not surprised that some 40% of Americans would blame the man who was almost murdered. I also don't stay up at night wondering the answer to the questions of this mythical shard or any other ways that the Democrats are trying to downplay the very near, within a hair's breadth assassination of Donald Trump only did not occur because at the last second he turned his head about 20 degrees. I know that it wasn't a shard from a teleprompter, for instance, because we have photographs from behind of the two teleprompters looking just fine after the bullet went through Trump's ear. As to why he wasn't immediately whisked off stage, I wonder why he wasn't held back in the holding room when they saw the shooter walking around a long while before the speech. Me, I'm a, just a regular Joe. When I go to a speaking event, they'll sometimes hold me back. I'm not the president of the United States, so that needs an answer. But then when he went down after having been shot, the reason they didn't pull him off is he went down, and he's a pretty big guy. We were hearing earlier that some of these agents couldn't even cover up to his chest, and then Trump himself said, hold on, let me get my shoe on. And he stood up there and he reassured the crowd, which demonstrated incredible political leadership, showed courage literally under fire. And then they got him off stage quickly after that. The answers that need to be given here are not how Donald Trump showed such immense courage and how this iconic photograph of political bravery was taken. The real questions are, why was Donald Trump not given sufficient security resources? Why did the Secret Service lie about the requests from the Trump campaign to get sufficient security resources? And how far up does this go? Sure, both parties now want to fire the Secret Service director, and she resigned, finally, under duress. But what about her boss, Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary? What about his boss, Joe Biden? How on earth is the most threatened man on planet Earth, Donald Trump, even needing to ask for additional security? And how on earth could it have been denied?
I completely agree. Got to leave it there. Thank you to my panel, Michael Knowles, Fajr Ali, Elizabeth Pitker. I appreciate it very much indeed. That's it for us now. Many of you have noted we are the content kings here at Uncensored. For the next few weeks, there'll be slightly less content. As the king, that's me, takes a bit of a summer break. Rest assured, we'll
During the summer of 2020, cool and wet weather is making a difference in Jasper National Park after wildfire destroyed parts of the town. For more, let's go back to CTV's Kamal Kalamali. Okay, Kamal, what are residents of Jasper waking up to this morning in Atlanta? Because, from here, we're all watching this in disbelief.
Good year. Litigation on the defendant's behalf. The next day, the defense campaign filed an election challenge suit in New Mexico at 11:54 a.m., 6 minutes before the noon deadline for the electors' votes, as a pretext so that there was pending litigation there at the time the fraudulent electors voted. That's insane. What the fuck? It's 14 to 30 to 14. That's a big one. There's no pending litigation and lost by 10% of the vote. Trump campaign files the challenge. Before the wait, 11:54 a.m. Oh. So for New Mexico, they really just made one up. That's fucking man. Is that base heads or that's
I want the American people to know that I had no right to overturn the election. And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution, but I took it. I want the American people to know that I had no right to overturn the election. And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution, and I always will. And I really do believe that anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States again. Now, with regard to the substance of the indictment, I've been very clear. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. I had hoped that this issue, the judgment of the president's actions that day, would be left to the American people.
Wild. What a fucking nutter. Okay. December 14th. The legitimate electors of all 50 states and the District of Columbia met in their respective jurisdictions to formally cast their votes for president, resulting in a total of 232 electoral votes for the defendant and 306 for Biden. Okay. November 14th. Legitimate electors to cast votes. 232 for Trump and 306 for Biden. The legitimate electoral votes that Biden won in the states that the defendant targeted and the defendant's margin of defeat were as follows. Arizona, 11,000 votes, 10,000 there. Margin of defeat. 10,000 Arizona, 11,000 Georgia. Wait, how many votes did Trump ask before he was ready? Was it the exact number? I think. It's here, Georgia. No, the perfect phone call was Arizona. No? It was Georgia. Oh yeah, here. The perfect phone call. He asked for one vote more than what he lost by. No fucking way, bro. Why did he wanted to win by one vote? God. Michigan. Yeah. Yeah, Rothenberger. That's so weird. Fucking clown. On the same day, at the direction of the defendant and co-conspirator one, fraudulent electors convened sham proceedings in the seven targeted states to cast fraudulent electoral ballots in favor of the defendant. In some states, in order to satisfy legal requirements set forth for legitimate electors under state law, state officials were enlisted to provide the fraudulent electors access to state capitol buildings so that they could gather and vote there. In many cases, however, as co-conspirator 5 had predicted in the fraudulent elector instructions, fraudulent electors were unable to satisfy the legal requirements. Nonetheless, as directed in the fraudulent elector instructions, shortly after the fraudulent electors met on November 14th, the targeted states' fraudulent elector certificates were mailed to the President of the Senate, the Archivist of the United States, and others. The defendant and co-conspirators ultimately used the certificates of these fraudulent electors to deceitfully target the government function, and did so contrary to how fraudulent electors were told they would be used. Okay? Unlike those of the fraudulent electors, but they're using that for consistent with the ECA, the legitimate electors' signed certificates were annexed to the state executive's certificate of ascertainment before being sent to the President of the Senate and others. That evening, 6:26 p.m., the RNC chairwoman forwarded to the defendant through his executive assistant an email titled Electors Recap Final, which represented that in the 6 contested states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the defendant's electors had voted in parallel to Biden's electors. The defendant's executive assistant responded, "It's in front of him." So, the defendant's attempt to leverage the Justice Department to use to seek to get state officials to replace legitimate electors' electoral votes with the defendants. This is all the stuff here has been thrown out though because Trump has immunity, right? This particular part. Leverage Justice Department. Place legitimate electors.
Late December 2020, the defendant attempted to use the Justice Department to make knowingly false claims of election fraud to officials in the targeted states through a formal letter under the acting Attorney General's signature, thus giving the defendant's lies the backing of the federal government and attempting to improperly influence the targeted states to replace legitimate Biden electors with the defendants. Late December, transit, used the Justice Department to make false claims of elected fraud. This is all him acting in his official capacity as he's going through the DOJ. December 22nd, the defendant met with co-conspirator 4 at the White House. Co-conspirator 4 had not informed his leadership at the Justice Department of the meeting, which was a violation of the Justice Department's written policy restricting contact with the White House to guard against improper political influence. Okay, On December 26th, co-conspirator 4 spoke on the phone with the acting Attorney General and lied about the circumstances of his meeting with the defendant of the White House, falsely claiming that the meeting had been unplanned. The acting Attorney General directed co-conspirator 4 not to have authorized contact with the White House again, and co-conspirator 4 said he would not. On the next morning, contrary to the acting Attorney General's direction, co-conspirator 4 spoke with the defendant on the defendant's cell phone for nearly 3 minutes. That afternoon, the defendant called the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General and said, among other things, people tell me co-conspirator 4 is great. I should put him in. Who's co-conspirator 4 again? Is that Jeffrey Clark? Right? The defendant also raised multiple false claims of election fraud while the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General refuted. When the acting Attorney General told the defendant that the Justice Department could not and would not change the outcome of the election, the defendant responded, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican Congressman. So that's probably important. December 22nd. Trump tells acting AG and acting Deputy, we just say that the On December 28th, co-conspirator 4 sent a draft letter to the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General, which he proposed they all sign. The draft was addressed to state officials in Georgia, and co-conspirator 4 proposed sending versions of the letter to elected officials in other targeted states. The proposed letter contained numerous knowingly false claims about the election and the Justice Department, including that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states. The Justice Department believed that in Georgia and other states, 2 valid slates of electors had gathered at the proper location on December 14, and that both sets of ballots had been transmitted to Congress. That is, co-conspirator 4's letter sought to advance the defendant's fraudulent elector plan by using the authority of the Justice Department to falsely present the fraudulent electors as a valid alternative to the legitimate electors. Okay. Draft letter sent to department officials asking them to sign. The Justice Department urged that the state legislature convene a special legislative session to create the opportunity to, among other things, choose the fraudulent electors over the legitimate. The acting deputy AG promptly responded to Crusader 4 by email and told him that his proposed letter was false, writing, "Despite dramatic claims to the contrary, we have not seen the type of fraud that called into the question the reported and certified results of the election." In a meeting shortly thereafter, the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General again directed Crusader 4 not to have unauthorized contact with the White House. On December 31st, the defendant summoned to the Oval Office the acting Attorney General, acting Deputy Attorney General, and other advisors. In the meeting, the defendant again raised claims about election fraud that Justice Department officials already had told him were not true, and the senior Justice Department officials reiterated were false and suggested he might change the leadership in the Justice Department. On January 2nd, 2021, just 4 days before Congress's certification proceeding, Co-Conspirator 4 tried to coerce the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General to sign and send Co-Conspirator 4's draft letter, which contained false statements to state officials. He told them that the defendant was considering making Co-Conspirator 4 the new acting Attorney General, but that Co-Conspirator 4 would decline the defendant's offer if the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General would agree to send the proposed letter to the targeted states. The Justice Department officials refused. Next morning on January 3rd, despite having uncovered no additional evidence of election fraud, Co-Conspirator 4 sent to a Justice Department colleague an edited version of his draft letter to the states, which included a change from his previous claim that the Justice Department had concerns to a stronger false claim that, as of today, there is evidence of significant irregularity that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states. Still trying on January 3rd, eh? Edited draft letter sent to Thanks. That's the Justice Department. Where outcome changing. Also, on the morning of January 3rd, Co-Conspirator 4 met with the defendant at the White House, again without having informed senior Justice Department officials, and accepted the defendant's offer that he become acting Attorney General. On the afternoon of January 3rd, Co-Conspirator 4 spoke with the Deputy White House Counsel. The previous month, the Deputy White House Counsel had informed the defendant that there is no option in which you do not leave the White House on January 20th. Now, the same Deputy White House Counsel tried to dissuade Co-Conspirator 4 from assuming the role of acting Attorney General. The Deputy White House Counsel reiterated to Co-Conspirator 4 that there had not been outcome determinative fraud in the election, and that if the defendant remained in office nonetheless, there would be riots in every major city in the United States. Co-Conspirator 4 responded, "Well, Deputy White House Counsel, that's why there's an insurrection now." Also that afternoon, Co-Conspirator 4 met with the acting Attorney General and told him that the defendant had decided to put Co-Conspirator 4 in charge of the Justice Department. The acting Attorney General responded that he would not accept being fired by a subordinate and immediately scheduled a meeting with the defendant for that evening. On the evening of January 3rd, the defendant met for a briefing on an overseas national security issue with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other senior national security advisors. The chairman briefed the defendant on the issue, which had previously arisen in December, as well as possible ways the defendant can handle it. When the chairman and other advisor recommended that the defendant make no action because inauguration day was only 17 days away, and any course of action could trigger something unhelpful, the defendant calmly agreed, stating, "Yeah, you're right. It's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy." The defendant moved immediately from this national security briefing to the meeting that the acting attorney general had requested earlier that day, which included co-conspirator 4, the acting AG, the acting deputy AG, the Justice Department Attorney General, the Office of Legal Counsel, the White House Counsel, the White House Counsel, and senior advisor. In the meeting, the defendant expressed frustration with the acting attorney general for failing to do anything to overturn the election results, and the group discussed co-conspirator 4's plans to investigate purported election fraud and to send his proposal letter to state officials, a copy of which was provided to the defendant during the meeting. The defendant relented in his plan to replace the acting attorney general with co-conspirator 4 only when he was told that it would result in mass resignations at the Justice Department and of his own White House counsel. At the meeting in the Oval Office on the night of January 3rd, co-conspirator 4 suggested that the Justice Department should opine that the Vice President could exceed his office during the certification proceeding and change the election outcome. When the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel began to explain why the Justice Department should not do so, the defendant said, "No one here should be talking to the Vice President. I'm talking to the Vice President." And then the discussion. All right. A long section. Exploitation of violence in the capital. Oh, we're getting to that right there. Okay. You guys are very quiet right now. You start doing it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Harris's argument with Yahoo. Yeah, I'll look at that, don't worry. Let's do that tomorrow. I think I just want to. I never want to do this in stream again. I should think that. Like I can just read this off screen and do it. Finish this one. Just for the experience, just to say we did it. The defendant's attempt to leverage the Justice Department to use deceit to get state officials to replace legitimate electors and electoral votes with the defendants.
He went on vacation when Netanyahu came to town, and BBC verified.
Yeah.
Where are they?
CNN,
Nowhere.
Jake Tapper refused, they would refuse to play Trump campaign speeches because of the lies. And then anytime that they do, they have to fact check it. And so, I mean, Netanyahu's speech, they would need multiple fact checkers for that one. I mean, it again, it's just an insult. And then Dana Bash gets on air and says, this was like a president giving a State of the Union address to the US people. Like, okay, yeah, maybe that is what this was.
Yeah, sometimes they let the truth slip out, as she did. It made Ilon Lee, Netanyahu's fired spokesman, who sent the thrill up his leg. This looked like an American president giving a State of the Union address. Said Dana Bash, who took the name of her, still has the name of her ex-husband, Jeremy Bash, who was the chief of staff for the CIA and the Pentagon. And was born Dana Schwartz, and whose father is a pro-Israel rabbi in New Jersey. So she's, one of the two major, I guess the three horsemen of the APAC-opolic. I can't even say it at CNN, along with Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper. APACalypse. Yeah.
It's her and then Anderson Cooper. They always have to have the CIA Vanderbilt asset on too. The four of them.
See, yeah, Anderson Cooper interned for the CIA in college. Let's go to the next lie. I mean, the lies are so staggering. I was trying to collect them all today, and I just had to eventually give up. Where are we at here? Wait. Okay, so Netanyahu's talking about how first he actually takes a swipe at the Biden administration, Congress, and he said they were saying that tens of thousands of people would be killed in Rafah if we went in. Well, guess who went into Rafah city in southern Rafah? Me. I went there and I met our commanders, and now he's describing meeting a commander.
How many terrorists did we take out in Rafah? He gave me an exact number, 1,203. I asked him, how many civilians were killed? He said, Prime Minister, practically none. With the exception of a single incident, where shrapnel from a bomb hit a Hamas weapons depot and unintentionally killed 24 people. The answer is practically none. You want to know why? Because Israel got the civilians out of harm's way, something people said we could never do, but we did it. Ask the commander.
They actually cheered for that.
So he's referring to the tent camp massacre, right, where Israel burned people alive in Rafah, and afterwards to claim that that's when they released that phony recording where they got actors to pretend as if they're people in Gaza, saying that that Israel hit our weapons depot and that's what caused the fire. So that's what you're talking about.
So yeah, the recordings are all very credible, like the threats, the Olympics that they're creating.
Like the assassination from from around the wall, yeah.
No, it's like hello, Habibi, Habibi. What was notable, maybe Habibi. What was notable about that massacre is that it was used with these so-called small bombs. The Biden administration was touting part of its great plan to reduce civilian casualties. They were no longer going to send 2,000 pound bombs, but instead rush these so-called small bombs to Israel. And those so-called small bombs are what massacred people in that Rafah tent camp. And then Netanyahu then goes and claims that that didn't happen. It only happened because Israel accidentally hit Hamas weapons. I mean, I don't think he's even referring to any incidents.
Well, when they kill people in Rafah, that's what the line was, that we accidentally hit this Hamas weapons depot, and that's what. So I think that's what he's citing there.
Yeah.
That was, and again, that's what gave us the recording.
Their cover story there was a Hamas senior operative there. There's so many senior operatives in Hamas. They have like more seniors than the AARP. And they're always in these camps where children are hiding in their secret attic when they get blown up by the Nazi militias of Netanyahu. And it really speaks to the objective, I think, the psychological objective of his speech, that the lie is so big. He's trying to establish an extreme dissonance between our reality and the one that he's putting forward, so that people in between will see him being applauded, telling these lies, and question the reality that would otherwise be provable, because it can't possibly be that so many people in Congress would take this seriously unless there was some truth to it. And so many people are inclined to actually trust his source. And who is his source? Anonymous commander Shlomo in Rafah, who killed 103 terrorists. Who are terrorists? Well, I mean, the Israeli military's basically told us that soldiers, they have fire orders, and that, hey, those kids that you're sniping in the head, American doctors are coming back, documenting multiple bullet wounds to the heads of children, 9-year-olds in Gaza. Well, those are future terrorists. So just saying you killed 103 terrorists, will fire bullets randomly. That was one of the more infuriating parts of his speech.
And the sad thing, what I felt watching that and watching all of the members of Congress just jump up for every little thing he said is, you have brave people like Thomas Massey who boycotted, and for the Democrats, it wasn't really that controversial at this point to do so. But for most people sitting in that room, I don't think they're even aware that another narrative exists. There are a few bad actors who totally believe this 100, they're ideologically committed to Zionism and to Netanyahu. But for most of the run-of-the-mill members of Congress in there, I think they're just that uninformed. They don't read for themselves the way Thomas Massey might, or seek out alternative information. They're just, this is the only reality that possibly exists for them, is the one that Netanyahu puts forward. And so it's just sad to think about people in our government being that dumb.
And they are. They are dumb, and they're
they just don't read, they don't do anything. They just really only care about money and sitting there.
Yeah, walking through the revolving door. Here's another lie from Netanyahu. All right, now this is just speaks to Netanyahu's insane worldview.
In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization.
So basically saying Iranians are uncivilized, the entire Arab Levant is uncivilized, and Israel he's channeling a deeply racist quote by the Zionist godfather Theodore Herzl during the high period of colonialism, when Herzl said that Zionism, Israel, future Zionist state will be a rampart of civilization against barbarism. And Netanyahu went on to say that Iran is actually coming to a neighborhood near you. They will invade, and essentially take over if you don't support us in Israel and give us the tools we need to finish the job.
Yeah. I'm gonna hop off, but I just want to make one more point because on that whole clash, he evoked Samuel Huntington to clash of civilization later into like this isn't a clash of civilization, it's a civilization against barbarism. So yeah, he was like taking the neocon line even more in a nastier, even nastier direction. So though at the end he did say victory over liberty, which said a lot. He accidentally
Well, stay with us for at least that one, and we'll hear the ultimate Freudian slip by Netanyahu, and then we'll bid farewell to us.
No matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road ahead, Israel will not relent. Israel will not bend. We will defend our land. We will defend our people. We will fight until we achieve victory. Victory over liberty, rather victory of liberty over tyranny. Victory of life over death or liberty, rather victory of liberty over tyranny. Victory. Victory over liberty, rather.
Yeah. The only true statement he made.
Yeah. Well, Anya, thanks for joining us. Any final thoughts on the Kamala coup before you go?
I just hope she doesn't pick Josh Shapiro. I think that'll make it even worse.
Well, that was deeply anti-Semitic of you, and I can get word of it. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Pick up Corporate Coup by Anya Parnville.
Yes. All right. Talk to you guys soon, or see you soon.
All right. So we're back to our usual buddy comedy. Netanyahu's victory over liberty. Well, the reason why it was such a beautiful Freudian slip was that Netanyahu is working through his lobbying cutouts and the lawmakers that he essentially purchased to de-democratize the United States, to outlaw and criminalize any speech that upsets him. That's why I think it really hit hard, it hit home with so many people when he slipped up like that. And that's the threat of Israel. I mean, everything he says is a projection. Every accusation is a confession. When he says Iran is coming, Iran is going to spread its values and take over our societies, and their military is getting stronger. That's what's happening with Israel. And DC was essentially turned into a little Israel for a day just to accommodate Netanyahu. Just over a week after the Secret Service allowed a guy to bear crawl for 4 minutes up a slope roof with a sniper rifle, they wouldn't let families get anywhere near, not only get near the U.S. Capitol, they wouldn't allow us into Union Station, which is not where Netanyahu was, without providing proof that we had an Amtrak vehicle. That was all for Netanyahu. Like large parts of the city were occupied by militarized forces, including federal police, to protect a foreign apartheid leader. Victory over liberty. That's what he gave. That's what he's giving us.
And you can see his victory over liberty too, not just in all the Republicans and Democrats who gave him standing ovation, applauded all the constant lies, but also in all the progressives who didn't confront him directly. They all stayed home. Only Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian member of Congress, was the only one who showed up, protest Netanyahu, and held up a sign calling him a war criminal. And everybody else on the progressive side, including Bernie Sanders, basically said that they released these statements saying why I'm not attending the Netanyahu protest. And, their message there was that they're not showing up with some sort of grand rebuke to Netanyahu. And really, I think it was actually very cowardly. And first of all, they left Rashida Tlaib to do this all by herself, which is a really huge burden. And it would have been so much more powerful if they all joined her and held up signs like that. Not just calling him a war criminal, but also mass murderer, which is what he is. Guilty of genocide, but they didn't. They all stayed home, and I think they didn't show up because they're intimidated by the Israel lobby and Netanyahu, and they know that if they actually did something direct like that, they face pushback. They face, they'd be called anti-Semites and all the usual smears. They maybe face more AIPAC spending to defeat them in their elections, but
I think it'd be worth it because that was a big opportunity to confront Netanyahu face to face, especially as their Congress is giving him tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons to commit mass murder. And I just think it's too bad that only Rashida Tlaib had the guts to show up and call him out to his face and do it in a, she did it in a very
Hello, my dear friends. You're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about South and Donetsk direction, about the city or village of Konstantinovka. I'll remind you that just yesterday we were talking a lot about this territory. We were talking about the posts that were published by the 79th Brigade. Let's take a look at the most important post published by them yesterday. The week-long post ended with the brutal art preparation of the Russians in Konstantinovka. Since night, the Russians has begun covering the squares with dense fires so that we, 79th Brigade, have dozens of dead, missing, and 300, which means wounded. Panic began on the outskirts of the village. The only thing is that there were no harsh assaults, but we have lost objective control, and most likely the Russian forces are already in Konstantinovka. A very difficult time is coming for our brigade, which means for 79th Brigade. So this piece of news was published yesterday, and according to this update, the Russians answered the village itself. And we were guessing when exactly the Ukrainians or the Russians will publish the videos that will confirm this. And today, the Ukrainian sources published the video of the biggest attack ever conducted by the Russians since the beginning of the special military operation. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians were using up to 57 armored vehicles, 12 motorcycles, and more than 200 stormtroopers, the biggest attack ever at once. The Ukrainians stated that as a result of counterattacks, as a result of clashes, they managed to destroy 6 tanks, 7 armored vehicles with the infantry, they destroyed 12 motorcycles, and the Russians lost 40 soldiers. It's not even 25% of the entire number of forces that the Russians were using for this attack. Anyway, as you can see in this video, there are a lot of episodes and lots of details, and one of the episodes was discovered, found geolocated in this part of Konstantinovka. So basically, the Ukrainians confirmed that as a result of Russian offensive operations, the biggest Russian assault, the Russians managed to enter Konstantinovka itself, and they began digging in deeper and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back. So, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that today, the 25th of July, the Russians began the assault of Konstantinovka, the battle for one of the most important defense chain of armed forces of Ukraine in the south and Donetsk direction. This is very important. Now let's move further. We have additional updates from Krasnogorovka from pro-Russian sources. We don't have any updates from pro-Ukrainian or neutral, just from pro-Russian. But they are saying that as a result of active clashes on the ground, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to create another cauldron. We are not talking about thousands of Ukraine, but probably 100 more or less, plus minus, of Ukrainian soldiers were encircled in the northern part of the city. So as you can see, we haven't adjusted the map because we are not relying on the sources as the, let's say, reliable. But anyway, Summarizing everything according to pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the territory that was captured by the Russians in the northern part of Krasnogorovka, and according to the same source, the Russians improved their positions and almost reaches in Sidova Strait, using this route to attack along the western part of Krasnogorovka as well. So these are these are two routes of attacks that were conducted by the Russians. This is the first one, and this is the second one. And as a result of these attacks, you see that significant number of territories, let's say in the northern part of Krasnogorovka, were encircled. And the Russians are saying that currently the Ukrainians who are located between these buildings and streets are no longer available for evacuation because the streets, let's say Ostrovskova Street, like this Pokrovskaya Street, Chkalova Street, Zhukova Street, on the streets are under complete Russian FPV drone control or fire control, and basically the Ukrainians lost once again their possibilities for evacuation. So there are a few options for them: either to stay there and to wait the unblocking operation, which most likely will never be conducted by the Ukrainians, or to surrender, or to stay there forever. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Western Avdiivka or Pokrovsk direction. We have additional updates from the village of Vovcha. According to different sources, pro-Russian and mainly pro-Russian sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this territory. So Vovcha was captured and secured by the Russians completely. According to pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the territory that is already under Russian control. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back from this territory completely. Now the Russians are going to regroup for a while, and then they will move further, most likely in the southern direction, with the purpose to attack Zhelandland from the northeast and from the east. Furthermore, we have additional video. In this video, we can see how the Russians discovered the positions of Abrams tanks, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, the Ukrainian Abrams tank was completely destroyed. As for the Ukrainians who were encircled, and the topic that we were talking about yesterday, this is the cauldron, according to information we have, a few forces of 31st Mechanized Brigade between Progress and Zavadska were black. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything that can give us additional clues or additional what is going on. Now let's move further.